Well, good afternoon. If I could have your attention so we can start the program. We've had a great morning, and I want to thank everybody for being part of our 2015 Solutions Summit. We are thrilled with this turnout. As I mentioned this morning at breakfast, we were in the Tri-Cities yesterday. So we had 200 folks over in the Tri-Cities, many of the same speakers. We appreciate all the speakers spending 2 days with us and doing this. So about 600 people will have attended the Solutions Summit this year. So thank you for making it such a success. For those of you that weren't here at breakfast, I'm Dan Mead-Smith. I'm the president of the Policy Center. And again, welcome. We decided to combine all of our research centers 2 years ago, all their events into one. I think it's worked out really well, where we can have a one-stop policy session. There's nothing quite like it in our state, so we appreciate you spending the second Solution Summit with us. A couple announcements before we get to the program. Parking, if you're just here for lunch, your parking is free because it's 3 hours validated free parking. You can get it validated out front. But if you're here all day, it's only $6. So get it validated no matter what. So again, it's free for 3 hours or only $6 if you've been here for the entire morning, thanks to Kemper. And there was a lot of discussion this morning. I think a lot of you came to the small business panel discussion, fantastic discussion with Howard Behar, Taylor Hung, and Michael Saltzman, and our own Aaron Shannon. There's a lot of kind of enthusiasm for folks to get involved in that minimum wage issue. Howard Behar has taken a lead on this issue, Aaron Shannon here at the Washington Policy Center. But there's been talk about maybe getting some folks together after this event. So Dave Barber, where's Dave Barber? Dave's on our board. Dave's right here. So Dave is going to just very informally, if you are interested in getting involved with the minimum wage discussion in our state, there's talk about maybe making Washington, $12 or $15 an hour minimum wage for the entire state, even though we already have the highest minimum wage. Dave's real active with our organization. He's part of the Bartell drugstore family company. So Dave is going to be over on the side here after the lunch. So just very informally, if folks are interested in that issue, this is a Solutions Summit. We're looking to kind of move forward on lots of different issues. But if that minimum wage issue is of interest to you in particular, maybe your business has some stories about the issue. You heard Taylor's very moving stories today about her family business in International District. Why don't you come afterwards at 1:30 and talk to Dave Barber. So thanks, Dave. Thanks. And then I think everybody got a copy of our conference program, and there's some of our material in here. And rather than giving you a whole big packet, we put most of the material online. So we have an online conference packet. If you want more information on the sessions, if you want the speakers' PowerPoints, you go to our website, washingtonpolicy.org, and it's right there on the home page. So and it's organized by session. So if you want more information on what you learned today, the online conference packet is a great way to do that. I want to thank all the sponsors. It's a lot of work to put on a 2-day event like this in 2 parts of the state. We have a fantastic staff at the Policy Center. We also want to thank all the sponsors. So our statewide sponsors for the both 2-day events, Brown Bear Car Wash, Chevron, Case Smith, Physicians Insurance, Primera, Blue Cross, Silver Cloud Inns and Hotels, and Washington Trust Bank. And our 1-day sponsors here in Bellevue, Associated Builders and Contractors, the Business Examiner, Columbia Bank, Keep Washington Competitive, Lilly, Synergy Construction, and Zymogenetics, and our media sponsor is the Puget Sound Business Journal. So please thank all of our sponsors today. We also have a number of co-presenting organizations. It's great to have all the different chambers and business groups involved in helping us promote the event. So they're listed on the back of your program and up on the screens. We appreciate all their help today. And we also want to welcome the Women of Washington. For the 2nd year in a row, they've held their January lunch event with us. So welcome to WOW, and we'll hear from their president here in a little bit. But we want to thank them for helping us co-present. And I want to thank all the elected officials. We have numerous elected officials who spoke at the panels, and we also have our Secretary of State, Kim Wyman, here. If all the elected officials could stand, and thank you for your service. And we wish you all the best in this upcoming session. As folks know that come to our events, we have a very dynamic Young Professionals program at the Washington Policy Center. We started a Young Professionals Advisory Board a few years ago. They've become much more formal. We have a chairman and a vice chairman. We have committees now in our effort to engage young people who are our future leaders of business and public policy. It's been a great project of Washington Policy Center. And we have over 35 college students with us today from Seattle Pacific University, CLU, University of Washington. We started a club at the University of Washington last year, so welcome to all of our college students. And I want to bring up our Young Professionals Chairman, Nathan Rimmer. Nathan is serving as our first chairman. We just started this new structure, and he's done a fantastic job. I want to bring up Nathan Rimmer for a few minutes.
Thank you, everybody, for being here today, and I'll just take a couple of brief minutes here to get you up to speed on what the young professionals are doing with the Washington Policy Center. Our focus has been on engaging and educating with Washington Policy Center material the next generation of young leaders to get them involved and active in public policy, focusing on free market solutions. To do this, we've been holding about 4 events per year, and including the annual dinner, in which we have our own separate event. This year we had about 300 young people, both young professionals and college-age students attend, and it was a great success, and it continues to grow. What we'd like to do is start getting more corporate sponsorship to get the young people out of the businesses and into policy and into Washington Policy Center. So businesses out there, keep the YP tables in mind next year at the annual dinner. We're also holding 3 separate debates this year on college campuses. Last year we did at the University of Washington a minimum wage debate. Also at Gonzaga University this year we will also be including a Washington State University debate on a topic to be determined. We also have, as Dan pointed out, a presence now at the University of Washington and are working on making inroads into the other universities of Washington State to get the youngest generation of leaders in Washington involved in free market ideas and into Washington Policy Center and making the right decisions as they move forward in their careers and with their families. So without further ado, I'll turn it back over to Dan. And again, everybody out here, please bring the young people you know into WPC. We're relying on you, and you're relying on us to carry this message forward. So thank you.
Thanks, Nathan. And I also want to introduce Samantha Bowman. Samantha is our new vice chairman of Young Professionals. So Samantha is going to be a part of this organization as well. So welcome, Samantha. Great to have you here. She works at Microsoft. And we're not able to do what we do at Washington Policy Center without the great board of directors we have and our Pillar Society. We started our Pillar Society 3 years ago, where our top donors have pledged contribution over 3 years to help support our new marketing efforts and our new strategic plan. And we now have over 60 members of our Pillar Society, starting out at $5,000 per year over 3 years and going up with different benefits. It's been a great way for us to kind of formulate our cash flow going forward, and our donors, get one ask per year, and they get different benefits like this event and receptions and our Palm Springs event and our annual dinner. So if all of our Pillar Society members could stand and board members stand and be recognized, thank you for what you do for the organization. They're the folks with the gold name badges. That's how you know if you're in the Pillar Society. You have the gold name badge. And I want to bring up our one of our board members, our new board chairman, Craig Williamson. Craig has been on our board for the last 7 years, been a supporter for over a decade, and he was our vice chairman for the last 2 years. He was elected our chairman in our mid-December meeting and took over at the first of the year. Craig's a small business owner, owns Comfort Systems, a local Puget Sound region provider of heating and cooling systems in the area. And it's been great to work with Craig on our marketing committee and as one of our officers of the organization, and we're excited about where he's going to help take us over the next couple of years. So, Craig, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Dan. I'm not sure I have the words to tell you how honored I am to be associated with one of our nation's premier state-level policy and research centers. It's just amazing. I'm truly honored. As a business owner with over 100 employees, I have firsthand knowledge of the role that state policy has on citizens' lives. And I think about our American values, and do that with me for a second. American values of liberty, opportunity, democracy, free markets. These core American values all share a common prerequisite. What is that? Our founding fathers wrote a lot about it, right? This prerequisite of an informed citizenry. They talk about the fact that without an informed public, the American promise is not possible. Well, the Washington Policy Center is the American promise in action. We're providing high-quality research, analysis, information to citizens and lawmakers that they can use to propagate the American dream. It's hard work, and the center does it well, and I'm so proud of the work that they do. With our 4 offices, Tri-Cities, Spokane, Seattle, and Olympia, we provide a flow of information and analysis that's regularly used by citizens and lawmakers in both parties. It's just tremendously important. 2014 was an incredibly successful year for WPC. And before I share a few highlights about 2014, I just want to take a moment and look back. There's a gentleman in the room, he's about ready to put food in his mouth, named Greg Porter, that I'm going to ask to stand up. Greg has been the chairman of the Washington Policy Center for the past 6 years. And some of you may be disappointed that he's not here again because he does such a fabulous job. WPC has doubled and redoubled its impact under Greg's leadership, and I would like to send a personal thanks on behalf of everybody associated with WPC to Greg Porter. Some of the accomplishments in 2014 included the fact that WCP testified before the legislature 14 times, and actually before the U.S. Congress 3 times. Our Young Professionals group is not only chartered, but gaining strength and vibrant, and you heard about that earlier. We have record attendance at our annual dinner. And by the way, we're constrained by the largest venue in Seattle, so if you want to go, you got to get your tickets early, because when it sells out, it really is sold out. Can't get any more people in the room. We've had media attention that's just been off the charts. We are referenced, or our work is referenced in the media an average of 5 times per day, including national references on places like Fox News, CNN, CBS, Forbes.com. Locally, we were instrumental in defeating King County Metro's Proposition 1, which would have raised taxes by $1.5 billion over 10 years and reduced bus service to citizens. Our research was instrumental in defeating that tax measure and preserving the bus services that were offered as a false choice. A big accomplishment. Another one of our long-standing recommendations was implemented for remote testimony. In fact, we provided the first remote testimony to Olympia, a Senate hearing committee, without having to go. And who was the one that did that? That was Jason Mercier, was the first person to testify, and that's going to be used more and more as we go forward. I'd like to take a moment now and share with you a quick video outlining some of WPC's impacts over the past couple years.
I'm Dan Smith, President of Washington Policy Center. Since our start, our first and foremost commitment has always been to improve the lives of Washingtonians all across our state. With a statewide staff of 17 and offices in Seattle, Spokane, Tri-Cities, and Olympia, Washington Policy Center is one of the largest state-based research organizations in the nation. Our ideas and research are routinely used at the local, state, and federal level.
11 bills based on our research and analysis were signed into law by the governor during the last 2 legislative sessions, and voters in our state adopted our recommendations on 5 out of 6 ballot measures during the last general election.
5 years ago, we opened our Eastern Washington offices at Washington Policy Center because we are committed to the entire state of Washington.
The work that Washington Policy Center has been doing on two-thirds tax limitation has been effective because we communicate directly with the public to explain the issue. We also provide briefings and research to public officials so they understand why it's important for government to limit the size of the taxes that they impose on people.
The Center's research was vital in getting the word out about King County proposition. King County officials have said that it's either bus cuts or taxes, and we showed that that was a false truth, that there were many options on the table that King County officials could implement to keep us with the taxes.
The Washington Policy Center contributed its think tank expertise to bring charges to Washington State, making Washington the 42nd state in the nation allowing such charter votes.
One of the most exciting highlights from 2014 was the expansion of our young professionals group with the launch of our first ever college club at the University of Washington.
We've been focusing on getting young people together, communicating about these issues, knowing about WPC and the research they're doing, and then also helping to get it in the hands of even younger people. We've been really excited to navigate the presence of WPC on college campuses.
Knowing the people here at WPC, for me personally, and I know for the other founders in the group, has been invaluable asset to SSU. As they continue on their college career, and I do college well.
Several years ago, we began to award one female college student with a $5,000 scholarship through the Jennifer Dunn Thompson Fund for America's Future.
Jennifer Dunn Scholarship not only allowed me to participate in the master's program, but also it got me involved in the Washington Policy Center.
Our ideas and research are routinely used at the local, state, and federal level.
We use Washington Policy Center research in our education policy, in our budget policy, and also transportation.
I really appreciate the good data, their analysis, and our perspective.
Groups like Washington Policy Center, they come alongside us as part-time members and give us the leverage that we need in order to get that information and make quality decisions, take quality votes as we're representing the city and the businesses, the residents that call the city home.
The Washington Policy Center was a dependable resource when I was serving in the state legislature, and I continue to value their great work. That's why I invited the Policy Center researchers to DC to testify before Congress.
We believe innovation and improvements to market solutions will give us a better today and leave the next generation of Washingtonians a better tomorrow.
My name is Greg Porter. I'm the proud chair of the Washington Policy Center since 2007. I couldn't be more proud of all the successes we've had at the Washington Policy Center as a result of staff's hard work and your tremendous support and involvement. I look forward to seeing all that lies ahead for the Washington Policy Center. I appreciate you standing with us as we continue to work to improve the lives of all of us who call Washington State home.
I stand with WPC.
I stand with Washington Policy Center.
I stand with Washington Policy Center.
I stand with Washington Policy Center.
Washington Policy Center, I stand with you.
Thank you to everyone who has stood with us over the years. And now, we ask you to continue to stand with us as Washington Policy Center moves forward.
Wow. So as you can see, there's a lot to be proud of. But also, like a local football coach might say, last week's great game has got nothing to do with being a champion. It's all about our next match. So we redouble our efforts looking forward to continue to extend our reach and impact to help to improve the lives of people in this great state. And I'll share with you briefly a couple of highlights about how we want to do that. First, going forward, we're working on refining our marketing. You'll see more videos, infographics, interactive devices, more modern, updated ways for us to share information and analysis in an attempt to be more effective in getting the word out. We conducted our first ever polling or research data. We had some focus groups, we got feedback from citizens, and we look forward to using that feedback to help and to sharpen our message and to sharpen our impact. Secondly, you can tell the enthusiasm we have over young people. We want to welcome the Washington State University campus into the young professionals environment. You'll see us continue to have these debates we talked about and to grow that group. We recognize that investing in young people is investing in our future, and that's what we intend to do. And lastly, and perhaps most pressing, we're on the verge of a new legislative session. Some people are saying it's the most important session in the history of our state. Washington Policy Center will be in the thick of the battle. We will be providing analysis, commentary, information that we believe will positively affect the outcome of that session. We're going to do the hard work that needs to be done to make a difference. And with that, I would just invite you again to become part of the cause if you haven't already. There's a white card on your table. I think most of you are already supporters, but if you're not, we sure wish you would be. If you'd be so kind as to fill that out and leave it behind, we'd love to welcome you to the team. And now it's time to hear from our keynote speaker, the reason probably most of you came. And to introduce our speaker, I'm delighted to welcome to the podium. And do I see her? Where is she? Is she coming? Oh, okay, here she comes. Welcome to the podium, a personal friend of mine, but that's a side note, a Pillar Society member and the current president of Women of Washington, Ruth Wright.
Thank you. This is my first Solutions Summit. I was out of town last year, and this has been a most amazing event, and we're going to take this back to more of our members, right, ladies, and encourage them to come next year. I'm very pleased to acknowledge and present to you Governor Pataki. And I do want to let you know that I know on the West Coast we try and have this little rivalry with the East Coast, and so in our own way, I've always known the governor as being Pataki, and then last night I was kind of looking for some information on your kids and saw Emily's little speech for running for the electric company, and she said Pataki, and I go, it's 8 o'clock at night. How am I going to say this speech with the correct name? So forgive me if I go back and forth because this is hard enough, so thank you. Governor Pataki is a potential 2016 presidential candidate, and he has an amazing resume. It spans 25 years, beginning as mayor of his small town of Peekskill, New York, continued on as the state assemblyman and state senator, and continuing on for 3 terms as the 53rd governor of the state of New York. Notably, Governor Pataki had a stunning upset, and most of you might know this already, of a political dynasty when he became the chief executive of a very deep blue state over Mario Cuomo, who was a very popular, liberal, democratic, 3-term governor. Governor Pataki was trailing by 10 points just 2 weeks prior to the election, but he was able to close the gap to win to become the next governor of the state. When he took office, though, he had faced a huge government that was strangling the private sector economy. New York was dead last in the creation of private sector jobs. During his tenure as governor, he dramatically reduced the size of government, and you need to let us know how to do that, reduced taxes and regulation to empower the private sector, raised the state's cap on the number of independent and charter schools. Crime was steadily reduced. He created a number of health care programs for the poor and seniors. He advanced award-winning, cutting-edge policies in renewable energy and environmental fields, and New York's credit rating was increased 3 times by Moody's Investor Services. Governor Pataki was instrumental in the reconstruction of Manhattan in the months and years following September 11th. He promoted the toughest anti-terrorism laws in the country. Most people don't realize that Rudy Giuliani left office 4 months after the terrorist attack. Governor Pataki remained committed to rebuilding and bringing commerce back to the area and remembering and honoring our American citizens. As chair of the Ground Zero Committee, he bravely disputed the committee's recommendations as not properly honoring the people who had sacrificed their lives. He was widely criticized for this until the final memorial was completed, for which he is now hailed as a visionary. Governor Pataki has a tremendous connection with his constituents, which stems from his upbringing on a small-town farm by second-generation immigrants, and formed his down-to-earth politics. He grew up in a small country school system and was able to attend Yale on an academic scholarship. He completed his JD at Columbia Law School. He's been married to his wife, Elizabeth, for 41 years, and they have 4 children, 3 grandchildren, so let's compare pictures afterwards. One son is an Army officer serving in Afghanistan, another son, a Marine officer who served in Iraq. His daughter is an author of 2 historical fiction books, and our WOW group will want to read the one on the traitor. She specializes in the American Revolution. And the 4th daughter is just was elected on the electrical board, the PEC board in Texas. He and his wife have certainly passed on their family values of patriotism, conservatism, integrity, hard work, and a desire to help others. He is currently counsel at Chadbourne & Park LLP, but he's never left politics. He served as a U.S. delegate to the 62nd session of the General Assembly of the United Nations. He co-chaired the Council on Foreign Relations Independent Task Force on Climate Change. He's a spokesman for the PAC entitled Americans for Real Change, which, like Pataki himself, focuses on smaller government and less regulations. He has fundraised and campaigned tirelessly for other candidates. He is the founder of the George E. Pataki Leadership and Learning Center to educate children on government, which is sorely needed, and focuses on making the American dream a reality for the next generation of young leaders. I knew this again. George Pataki is a man who not only won as a Republican in a very blue state, but who still remembers that he owes his success to his grassroots conservatives and delivers on policies that matter to them without compromising his own visions. Governor Pataki, welcome.
Ruth, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. If I didn't know better, I'd say, wow. I'm sorry, forgive me. It's after 3 in New York City. So let me just first thank all of you for being here, and Dan and Craig, thank you for having me. I was chatting with them earlier, and I can't tell you what it would have meant to me when I was governor to have an organization like that in New York State. It is just tremendous that you have such breadth of support, that you don't just sit back and react to things that might be going wrong in the Capitol. You actually are proactively out there with an agenda to help make this a more business-friendly state. So thank you for being there. Thank you for what you do. And boy, it would have been nice to have some of you in New York back when I was governor. I am going to talk about solutions and some of the things I did as governor of New York to improve the economic climate of the state, and things that you might be able to do here in Washington as well. But before I do that, I just have to comment on the horrific attacks in Paris that happened within the last day. We cannot simply wish terrorism away and pretend that when we lead from behind, there aren't going to be those around the world, and sadly here as well, who detest the freedoms that we too often take for granted. We have got to be far more aggressive in going after those who want to attack us again.
We have to secure our border. We cannot, in this dangerous time, shrink our military to smaller than before World War II. We have to rebuild our military. We have to stand with our allies when they have challenges. We can't draw a red line and then tell the world, never mind. We can't repeatedly say there will be serious consequences when an enemy of freedom breaks international law and then do nothing. I've seen the consequences of an inaction. I was in New York City on September 11th. They want to attack us again, and we need to be proactive, vigorous, and destroy those who would attack us overseas before they have the chance to attack us here. But now let me get back. Solutions. This is a solutions conference. And last night, I was speaking to a group, and I was trashing Washington. And I was looking around, and I was getting all these blank looks, like I was from, some alien planet. And one of your greatest public servants, Senator Slade Gorton, was there. And Senator, thank you for being here. And Senator Gorton goes to me and says, remember, when you're here, you have to refer to it as the other Washington. So if I slip up and go out on a rant trashing Washington, thank you, Senator, it's the other Washington that I will be trashing. Ruth talked a little bit about some of the things I did when I got elected governor of New York, and our business climate was the worst in America. Bar none. We had the highest tax burden in America, the lowest credit rating in America. We were last in private sector job growth. And when I took office, one of the post-election wonderful gifts that was left to me was a $5 billion deficit in the upcoming state budget at a time when $5 billion was a lot of money. So I had run that I was going to change the business climate, lower the tax burden, and give people confidence in the future of the state. And when people found out about that $5 billion deficit, they said, well, you're going to have to defer those tax cuts. And I looked at them and said, no, we're going to go forward with those tax cuts. When you are shrinking the private sector, it is more important than ever to send a message that their future can be in New York, that they can invest, they can build, they can create jobs and opportunity in the state of New York. And some of the solutions that we looked at, I'll just give you a couple. And let me tell you a secret. Government never thinks it has enough money. It is always, if you roam the halls of a Capitol, there are always lobbyists there asking for more for a very good cause, asking for even more for another very good cause. And if you're an elected official, it's always a lot more popular to say yes than no. But what our state governments and the federal government, too, have to recognize is that it's not their money, that it comes from the people they're supposed to be representing. And when government grows too big and too powerful, it strangles the private sector economy. And that's exactly what happened before I took office in the state of New York. Coming from New York, one of the things I focused on was lowering the income tax rate, the personal income tax rate. And I'd always look around the country, and I go, Washington has it made. You have zero personal income tax. But as I've gotten to know a little bit more, there are significant challenges to your business climate here in Washington State as well. You have that business and occupation tax. And just imagine for a minute, this isn't a tax on profit, this is a tax on revenue. So if you're a small business starting out, and most small businesses don't survive 2 years, but you have a dream and you're willing to work hard and want to create jobs and opportunity, but you're not making any money, you still have to pay a tax. How crazy is that? How anti-growth, how anti-jobs is that? And I'll tell you something, I'm not running for governor of Washington, but if I were, I'd propose abolishing the B&O tax, because I think it would have a profound impact on raising government. Now, I know right now your government has all the money it needs, so they're almost a $3 billion more revenue, so I'm sure that's going to be all given back to the people, but no, I guess that's actually not what the plan is. Well, let me tell you some of the things you can do, because I went through it all. When I took office, the first thing I realized was the government is way too big and bloated. We had too many employees. And one of the suggestions I would make to those fighting the fight to not only prevent tax increases, but to lower spending and lower the tax burden, is have a hard hiring freeze on new employees in government. Day one, I declared a hard hiring freeze. Not one vacancy would be filled without a sign-off from our budget office. And by the end of the time I left office, I have reduced the size of the state workforce by over 15%, over 25,000 workers. And it wasn't, it wasn't as though people were waiting in line because they couldn't get services. They didn't have to fill out as many forms. They didn't have to deal with as many bureaucrats, and government was functioning far more efficient than it had more workers. The second thing, and by the way, it wasn't just a hard hiring freeze. We did things like we created an early retirement incentive program so that people would leave. But those often don't work because it's a short-term fix where you get rid of someone earning a higher salary and have to pay their pension but start out with a lower salary. So it was only available to people whose positions were being abolished and wouldn't be filled. And it had a profound impact in allowing us to reduce the workforce. We had virtually no layoffs because people took advantage of those opportunities, and we abolished the positions. You're a very highly unionized state. The only more unionized state in America is New York. So I sat down with our public employees and said, look, I'm going to reduce the size of the workforce. Either you're going to work with us or we're going to have layoffs. And they actually agreed to work with me. And one of the things we did is we allowed transfers from department to department. It used to be that if we had a surplus engineer in the Department of Transportation, we couldn't move them to the Department of Environmental Conservation because they worked for different agencies. We allowed interagency transfers so we could abolish jobs, move people, and in that process, again, create savings and a reduction of the workforce. And I'm the only Republican has been elected governor in over 45 years in New York, so a lot of the bureaucrats weren't exactly friendly to the policies that I wanted to implement, and they had civil service, so I couldn't get rid of them. But when you have the will, there is always a way. And I'll tell you something. If you decide in this particular agency that is not supporting your agenda, and you can't lay them off, that maybe Brooklyn is too crowded and that agency should be located in Buffalo, New York instead. You would be amazed at how many of them decide to retire just like that. So whatever it took, we had this commitment to reducing the size of government. And there are two ways to balance a budget. One is to reduce the size and the cost of government. The other is to grow the private sector, to grow the economy. And while we were doing this, and also changing entitlements, by the way, we completely restructured everything from health care to the welfare system. And when I left, we had over 1 million fewer people on welfare than we did when I took office in the state of New York. We also looked at discretionary spending. And when you don't have the money, you don't spend the money. Everybody in this room knows that, but the politicians often don't know that. If they don't have the money, they spend it and then look to take it from you to make it up. And that is simply wrong. And Ruth, in her kind introduction, mentioned how I was very active in conservation matters. And I'll never forget, I had been in the legislature. The first year, I proposed completely abolishing a fund called the Environmental Protection Fund. And a group of my friends in the conservation movement came in and said, how could you do this? You were pro-conservation and everything. I said, yes, I am, but we simply don't have the money. And then they came to me and said, there's this great piece of land available. Could you not preserve this land, at least part of it? And I go, no, we don't have the money. To make a long story short, 12 years later, my last year when we were leaving, the group came in and said, this same property is still available. Can you buy a little piece of it? And I said, no, I can't. And they go, well, why is that? And I said, we're not going to buy a piece. We're going to buy the whole thing. And when I left, we had added over 1 million acres of open space to the state of New York because we had the courage as an administration to say no when we didn't have the money, so the private sector could grow to generate the money where we could invest in the things that the people of the state wanted. So reform entitlements, reduce the size of government, and when you don't have the money in discretionary programs, even if you love the program, don't spend the money. Now that's how you reduce the size and cost of government. But then you have to grow the private sector economy. And certainly, the biggest impediment in New York when I was there was the tax burden, the highest in America. So we implemented a comprehensive tax cut program aimed at personal income taxes, business taxes, property taxes. I abolished the tax on beer. That was really popular, and one of the reasons I got reelected. But by the end of my term, we had cut taxes by $143 billion. More than all other 49 states combined. And because of that, the private sector grew. We had enormous investment. We had almost 700,000 new private sector jobs. And instead of having these deficits, despite those tax cuts, we had over $4 billion in surplus when I left. Grow the private sector, shrink the government, lower the tax burden government places on the people and business. And that is how you end up ultimately with the resources government needs to do the things that need to be done. Now, there was a second killer to jobs in New York State, besides taxes, and that was the hideous regulatory climate. We had regulations for everything. It was just awful. And as I would talk with business leaders around the state, I'd go, well, you have a tax problem. Yes, but we also have a regulatory problem. We can't deal with all these regulations. So it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but what did I do about that regulatory problem? I created another office, but it was called the Office of Regulatory Reform. And I signed an executive order. I don't think I'm not happy with the executive orders coming out of the other Washington, but I signed an executive order that said that no agency could issue any new regulation without getting sign-off on the Office of Regulatory Reform, and that they had to accompany it with a cost-benefit analysis. We stopped this overregulation. But more than that, I empowered that agency to go through existing regulations and modify or repeal them if they didn't make sense. And by the time we were done, they had modified or repealed over 3,000 regulations that were killing jobs and preventing business from being able to succeed in New York State. And I don't know if you have it here, but I remember one of the first ones, the head of the Office of Regulatory Reform comes in to me and he says, all right, we're going to abolish this regulation, we're going to abolish that regulation. One of them I remember is, I don't know if you had it here in Washington, but on pillows and mattresses, there'd be a little tag. And it would say, do not remove this tag under penalty of death or something like that. And so they were looking around, why does this pillow say you can't remove the tag? And they looked back, and something like 150 years ago, there had been infected horsehair put in a pillow, and it created an illness. So they said, oh my God, we have to know there's no infected horsehair in the pillow. That regulation was repealed too. And now if you come to New York, you won't have the little tag on your pillow. So anyway, regulatory reform is absolutely critical. Lower the tax burden. Create a business-friendly environment where you get rid of the job-killing regulations. And then I'll never forget another incident I had. I went around and talked to the business leaders after I won the election, but before I took office. And I remember meeting with the head of Kodak, which then was New York State's largest employer. Now it's gone, which tells you why small business growth in this state is so important. Yes, you have Amazon. Yes, you have Boeing. Yes, you have Microsoft, Starbucks, all these great companies. But 20 years from now, they might not be here. Who knows? And that's why you need to continue to empower and grow those small businesses that become the next Microsoft or Amazon. So I went to the head of Kodak, and he says, yeah, the tax climate is awful, the regulatory climate is awful, but you know what is really killing us is the marketplace moves fast. And when we want to build a plant or a factory, and we decide probably against economic sense, to build it in New York State. By the time we make that decision to when we can put a shovel in the ground, it can be a year and a half, 2 years, because of all the hurdles in the planning process. So one of the things we did is the state government went ahead, reached out to local governments and said, what we want to do is pre-permit sites for construction. And we pre-permitted sites for computer chips, manufacturing facilities, other manufacturing facilities, major office complexes. So if a company decided that they were going to build another plant, not only have we improved the regulatory and the tax climate, but they could put a shovel in the ground within 30 days. And that was an extremely empowering tool. And then the fourth solution that we had was we didn't just want to help the existing businesses, we wanted to create a new dynamic. And in upstate New York, the old Erie Canal corridor from Buffalo to Albany had 100 years ago been a great success with heavy industry, but it became harder and harder to get heavy industry to locate in the United States, let alone in the old Erie Canal corridor. So what I did is I sat down and we created this concept of centers of excellence. And what those centers of excellence were essentially incubators for the next generation of manufacturing and other tech jobs that would come into America. And what I did is I went to each of the major communities, challenged the private sector, challenged the university sector, challenged the not-for-profit sector, and said, the state of New York will put hundreds of millions of capital into research facilities aimed at creating 21st century jobs, but only if the private sector, the university sector, and the not-for-profit sector match it 3 for 1. And I'll just give you one example. We did it in Albany in nanoelectronics. IBM came in, some of the other major companies came in. We had RPI, Albany. Do you know where the most advanced center for nanoelectronics in the world is today? Virtually nobody knows this. It's Albany, New York. We have over $5 billion of pure research facilities, virtually all now funded privately. Every major nano company in the world is at this facility doing their research. The tools, the computer etching tools are so expensive. There was one tool I remember cost $85 million. And no one company wanted to buy it, but when they came collaboratively together, they keep their data, but they share the equipment. And there is one building where there's a glass wall with the machine in the middle. And on the one side is Intel, and on the other side is Tokyo Electron. They hate each other. They never talk. That's why there's the glass barrier that covers almost all the machine. And you'll go there. On the one side, the Japan Electric people will be doing research, on the other, Intel. And that research has now led to over $25 billion in private sector investment in chip manufacturing plants in upstate New York, and thousands of jobs. So the solutions that I would propose don't mean raising taxes, expanding government power to deal with government's everlasting need for money. It's reduce the cost and the size of the government by making it more efficient and getting it back to its core mission, and grow the private sector jobs by innovative programs, most of which do not cost 1 nickel. Our Office of Regulatory Reform cost virtually nothing. Our centers of excellence, once they got going, cost virtually nothing. These are things that government can do to empower you to want to continue to invest and grow right here in this Washington, not the other Washington. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. I'd be happy to answer any questions, but let me just again say, it is so tremendous to see an organization like this in a state like Washington so committed to helping use private sector solutions so that the next generation, and you have a lot of college students here, are going to be able to get great jobs and careers right here in the state of Washington. Thank you, and now I'm happy to try to answer any questions about that. Dan? Sure. Sure. How do we get a Republican elected? That's the question? Well, I'll tell you how we did it in New York. And it's ideas, it's policies and philosophy, but there are two important elements. You know, like I ran on dramatically reforming the welfare system, because when I took office, 1 in 11 of every man, woman, and child in the state of New York was on welfare. Just think about that for a minute. Not Social Security, not Medicaid, not disability. 1 in 11 of every man, woman, child from the tip of Long Island to the Adirondack Mountains was on welfare. And people said, it's become such a way of life, you can't change it. And I knew we could change it by putting in place intelligent policies. But to get elected, you know, too often Republicans will say, we have to reform welfare, get the freeloaders off, stop wasting taxpayer money. That's not how I saw it at all. How I saw it was the state of New York had created a system where people, good people who want to be a part of the American dream, took a look at their family's self-interest and said they're better off on welfare than taking that first job up the ladder of economic opportunity for $8 or $9 or $10 an hour. Because they wouldn't get the welfare check, their kids wouldn't have health care, they wouldn't have child support, and all of a sudden, their family was worse off. So we changed the entire paradigm, and as I said, we had over 1 million fewer people on welfare when I left office. But it wasn't about taking freeloaders off the system, it was about empowering people with opportunity. Telling someone that you can have the sense of pride and self-worth that comes from being home, bringing a paycheck home to your family so your kids look up to you, and that you can be a part of the American dream and not dependent on government. So the policy was a very conservative policy, but the approach was to empower people instead of trying to divide people. And that's one way a Republican gets elected. And the second is to just give you one other example. Too often Republicans, and I believe my party's policies work for everybody. You know, we had a tough approach to crime. If you live on a Fifth Avenue with a doorman, you're not going to get mugged on the way home from work. But if you're going to Bedford-Stuyvesant at night on the subway after working, they were the people who were at risk, the low-income people who would most benefit from our policies, and I pointed that out. But as Republicans, particularly in a state like New York, I knew I had to reach out beyond the traditional Republican base. And let me just tell you one thing I did. When I took office, the Republican state headquarters was in a hotel in Midtown Manhattan. You know, so typical. All right, what's wrong with that? It sent all the wrong messages. I moved that office to a storefront in Upper Manhattan on Dyckman Street in a 100% Dominican neighborhood. And when that opened up and I went there and would speak on the street to people in my broken street Puerto Rican, you know, but they all encouraged me, despite the fact they could barely understand me. We had pickets from the Democratic Party saying, you don't belong here. You don't care about people like us. And we sent a message that, yes, we do care about people like you. And the last time I ran, I won a plurality of the Dominican and Puerto Rican vote, which is something that often doesn't happen to Republicans. Reach out to constituencies that have been taken for granted by the Democratic Party, but who never even see or hear of a Republican, and approach them with our policies in a way that makes them understand that the policies work for everybody. You know, like talking now about jobs. You know, if you're an affluent person and your state has a horrible economic climate, you can move. You can leave. If your company goes somewhere, you can follow it. But it's people striving to become a part of the American dream who are most trapped in the economic circumstances that a bad economy and a bad economic climate because of government leaves behind. So I think when the message is right, when the effort is right, policies that work for everybody shouldn't limit your political ability to win. Thank you. Sorry, the lighting here. Yes, sir.
Would you comment on disruptive technologies like Airbnb that your Attorney General in New York is going after?
Yeah.
Uber, Lyft, those kind of things.
I know. Yeah. It's not so much they're afraid of the disruptive technology, but big government inherently becomes corrupt not in the criminal sense, but corrupt in the sense that people with a vested interest in the government policy have a disproportionate say. And I mean, just like you mentioned Uber and Lyft, all of a sudden the taxi cab drivers and the owners see this as something that is a threat to them. So what do? They don't compete in the marketplace. They go to the politicians and say, outlaw them. And I think it's just awful. This is one of the things that has made this country so spectacularly great and a place of opportunity for people from all over the world, is that disruptive technology, is that American creativity and the willingness to risk and take a chance. So it's just another case where government becomes defenders of the status quo and their friends at the expense of innovation and opportunity. Yes.
Another example of disruptive innovation are charter schools, and I know New York has been a leader in that area. Can you tell us how they've improved public education in New York State, not just in New York City, which we hear about all the time, but also upstate?
Yeah, I mean, charter schools are another example where our policies that are considered conservative policies, creating competition in the public education system, are most important to those who generally don't vote Republican. You know, if you're from an affluent suburb and have a good school system, you don't need that competition. If you're affluent and can send your kid to private school or off to prep school, you don't need a good public school. Who are we trapping in failing public schools with teachers who can't teach? Not the affluent. We're trapping those who most need a good education so that their kids can have that opportunity to compete and succeed successfully in the 21st century. So we put in place probably the strongest charter school program in America. The idea is that it's within the public system, but it operates outside the rules, and it could even operate outside unionization under the law that I passed, so that you can have innovation, you can have different approaches, and I think the best way for a society to move forward is not for the top to say this is how you do it. It's for innovation to come from the bottom and competition, and intelligent people replicate what works successfully. I just want to tell you, that was one of the laws that nobody was for when I was proposing it. You know, I was kind of like Custer at the Little Bighorn when that was happening, and there were me and a handful of other conservative thinkers who wanted it. And I can tell you how I got it passed, you know, which I probably shouldn't say, but I will. The New York State Constitution says that legislators can only vote themselves a pay rise when there's an intervening election. The legislators hadn't had a pay raise for some time. And there'd just been an election, and in January they're going to have another session, so they either had to get a pay raise between November and January, or they couldn't get it until the following election a few years down the road. So Republicans and Democrats came to me together and said, we want a pay raise. And I said, I don't think you deserve a pay raise. You know, which went over really well. And the Democrats said, hey, look, you're out of your mind because you're not ticking us off, just us. You're ticking off your own party. And the Republicans said, you can't do this to us. You know, we're great people. We love you, and we need a pay raise. And I said, no, you don't. But what I said is that, I'll tell you one thing. Pass my charter school bill, and against my better judgment, I will sign the pay raise bill. So the way it works in New York is the governor has 10 days to sign the bill. And they had my charter school bill. They had no intention of doing anything. They said, you're out of your mind. We're not going to do that. We know you're going to sign the bill. We're just going to wait you out. And I said, fine. 10th day comes along. Nothing's happened. I'm ready to veto the bill. About 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I get a call from the legislative leaders. Can we talk to you? And I go, no. Which was a complete breach of protocol. And they go, what do you mean, no? And I go, you know what has to happen. You pass my charter school bill, and I will sign your pay raise before midnight tonight. And they go, well, you're still out of your mind. We're not going to do that. Around 6 o'clock, I get another call. Same conversation. Around 7 o'clock, they say, can we come down to see you so we can talk? And I say, no. And they go, what do you mean, no? I had left the Capitol and gone over to the residence because I knew they'd come down whether I said yes or no, and I didn't want to talk to them. Finally, around 8:30, they called and said, okay, we'll pass your charter school bill, but you got to sign the pay raise. So about 11:50 that night, the great New York charter school bill was finally passed by the legislature. So you know, this, as Craig knows, this is a solution summit. My philosophy was very simple. You know where you have to get there, just figure out, you know where you're going, just figure out what you have to do to get there. And it worked out pretty well.
Over here. Hello? Is this on?
Yes.
Okay. I'm a native New Yorker, and I was in the Trade Center for 8 years and was there for the first attack. So thank you for everything you've done to restore the city to its glory. That being said, and given the events of what happened in Paris today, what are your thoughts on foreign policy, and what changes would you make to protect American citizens going forward?
You know, I thank you, because I think it is an absolutely critical issue. And too often government glosses things that are extremely important over and pretends that things are all right. I tried to touch on that when I spoke. But the first thing is we have to have a secure border. We cannot be safe in our country when we know that tens of thousands of people are coming here illegally. We don't know who they are, but we do know that significant parts are controlled by drug lords and drug gangs, and we do know that terrorists want to use those borders to come here to attack us again. That simply, you can't have a secure country if thousands of people can come here, you don't know who they are, why they're here, or what they're doing. And then, as I said earlier, we have to rebuild our military. It's just not right that in this extremely dangerous time, the best military in the world is being wound down at a time when we need to be able to be much stronger in the world. I'm not, as you may have figured out, a great believer in leading from behind. You know, there are, I think the consequences of that are horrific. And I think back, and I just want to talk about ISIS for a moment now. Think back to September 11th. When we were attacked on that horrible day, it was by a handful of people trained and based in Afghanistan, one of the most remote parts of the world, with virtually no money, and the most sophisticated weapon they had were box cutters. And yet they were able to do horrific, horrific damage to America, damage we still feel today. Now look at ISIS. ISIS controls territory. It has hundreds of millions of dollars. It has thousands of people with Western passports who can go back to Western countries, including the United States. It is active on the internet, recruiting people. And our response is, we're going to go on the internet and try to convince people not to join a crazy group like ISIS. That's not the right answer. We got to kill them. And I think the sooner we do it, the safer we will be. And, you know, I'm not a fan of military intervention unless it's absolutely necessary. I'm not a fan of nation building because that's not what our military does. They blow things up. They don't build things. But right now, if we do not proactively get more aggressive in seeking to destroy ISIS, I just fear the consequences of what might happen here after what happened in Paris. Yes, sir. I just want to make one comment. I flew out on the plane from New York yesterday, a big crowded plane. I'm the only one with a suit. I go through the airport. I'm the only one with a suit. I go to this event. I'm the only one with a suit. I was worried today that maybe I should have worn a flannel shirt and jeans, but most of you are dressed like me, so I feel welcome. But forgive me. That was not a slight. I'm jealous of your attire.
Thank you, Governor. I grew up in Vermont, so it was right next to New York. Mm-hmm. And back when I was growing up, New York had these terrible things called toll roads. And I think I got a few more now, and we're just putting our toe in the water to toll roads. How is toll roads done in terms of reducing congestion in New York State?
You know, governments often are broke. And the infrastructure needs in this country are enormous. And I don't think we can expect trillions of government investment to be made for the necessary infrastructure improvements we need. One of the things that has been done all over the world and is being done in the United States now are P3s, public-private partnerships, where if you need a new road, you can get a private company to build that road and charge tolls to recoup its expense. And government can set the parameters. And as Ruth mentioned earlier, my older son lives in Texas, outside of Austin. And it's really fascinating what they've done there. There are 2 highways leading out to the little town outside of Austin that he lives on. One is public highway built by the state of Texas. The other is a private highway built by a private company, and it charges tolls. So people have the option to choose. You know, is it worth the $2 or $3, whatever the price is, to go on the private toll road? Or do I have enough time, and the money means enough to me, that I'm going to stay on the more crowded public road? So I think we need to invest in infrastructure. We can do it that way, and now there's a second way we can do it. You know, right now, one of the tragedies of our horrible tax code in the other Washington, and the fact that we have the highest corporate tax rate of anywhere in the industrialized world, is that American companies have $2 trillion in profits overseas that they can't bring back. That is an absolute disgrace. And if I just go off a little bit here, I remember 25 years ago when they had to build a wall around East Berlin to keep the East Berliners from fleeing to the more prosperous and free West. We now have American companies looking to merge with overseas companies to get out from under American taxes, and the response of the administration and the other Washington is to say, we're not going to let you do that. We're going to build a wall and penalize you for trying to do that. That's absurd. There's no reason why every company in the world shouldn't want to invest in this great country and help us create the opportunities of the 21st century. We have to dramatically lower our corporate tax rate. We could do that, bring back that $2 trillion. And if, for example, we told companies overseas, all right, next 3 years, bring that entire $2 trillion back, and instead of the 39% effective tax rate, we'll tax you at 10%. And take that 10% and use it to invest in infrastructure. We would get $2 trillion of private money back here, invested here. We'd have more government revenue that could be used to build the infrastructure and provide, you know, the sense of growth and excitement that we need in the 21st century. Thank you. One more?
One last question, yeah. Right there.
How can Mayor de Blasio improve his relationship with the police department?
You know, it is the worst I've seen in my lifetime. And it is a terrible situation. And I actually sent out a tweet after the assassination of the 2 police officers saying, in my opinion, this was the predictable outcome of the divisive anti-cop rhetoric of de Blasio and Eric Holder. And sadly, I think that's true. And de Blasio, among other things, made the New York Police Department the focus of his campaign to win the Democratic primary. And the most revered institution in America at the beginning of 2013, by the end of that primary, was being called for a federal monitor, investigations, and the fact that it was a racist police force, even though a majority of the NYPD are minorities. That was the worst thing he did, but then it got even more crazy because we've had those protesters roaming around the city of New York, hundreds of them, saying, what do we want? Dead cops. When do we want them? Now. And instead of denouncing that horrible attack on brave people who risked their lives to defend us, he said, oh, these are peaceful protesters. He met with the protest leaders but wouldn't meet with the police leaders. So I don't know that that horrific relationship can be repealed, but I'll tell you, repaired. But I'll tell you one thing. He should apologize to the police. He should let them know he appreciates their sacrifice, and he should acknowledge what he said throughout his campaign, and most recently, is horribly wrong. Good. Thank you very much. On that positive note, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity.
Well, you can see why we invited him to address and close this two-day conference. That was fantastic. And one of the reasons why we did invite him is because he has a great example of how you can govern in a liberal state like Washington. So there's great examples there that reflect Washington Policy Center recommendations that we can implement in Washington State. So thank you for giving us those examples. And we're going to work day in and day out over the next 105 days or more in this very critical legislative session. We hope you join with us. If you're not already a member of the Policy Center, please join with us. It's a great time. It's an exciting time for the organization, but more importantly, it's a crucial time for our state. And we're going to give you the information you need to engage during this legislative session. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for the successful conference, and we appreciate everything you do for Policy Center.